Can you share with us, like, what is leadership shock? What does that concept mean?
Sure. Well, let me kind of share how I discovered leadership shock. And the way I
Okay.
discovered leadership shock is I kept finding my executive coaching clients in the same space. And
Which
their
is?
space was their calendars were out of control. They were fighting fires constantly. Their teams were really confused, and they never felt like they were doing a good job. And I kept like because like often as an executive coach, the organization will come to you and say, "We have Joe's a leader. Can you come and help her?" And I'd come in, and they would have all the same symptoms.
Yep.
And it probably took me longer than it should have, right? Like to piece it all together. But I suddenly realized that, hold on, these people they're all in the same place. And that place is something has changed in their leadership role. Now, most cases, it's people that got promoted and were struggling, but not all cases.
Right.
Some cases, it's their role hasn't changed, but the organization has changed around them. Sometimes it's they haven't changed, the organization hasn't changed, but they have a brand new boss that has very new demands on them. There's something around their context that has changed, that has led them down this space of functioning, but not doing it very well. So the reason why I call it leadership shock, and it was actually a professor at University of Colorado, who said, this sounds like shock. Like the leaders, it's like the heart's beating, blood's pumping, like so things are happening, but actually there's not leadership. Like you're not living, like you're in shock. You're not leading, you're surviving. Right.
Yeah.
So real survivor piece. Like if I feel like I'm surviving and not thriving, you're probably going to be in some version of leadership shock. So that's how I described it. And it normally happens because people got into a role because they were really good at doing things a certain way. And this new role requires them to lead differently. But because we're mostly implicit about how we lead and what we do, they haven't changed the way that they lead. And therefore, all hell's broken loose. And so that's really mostly what leadership shock happens.
I mean, I resonated at first when I saw the title. I was like, oh, what is this going to be about? And then as soon as I read that description, like you said, about the calendar being full and the team being like confused, I was like, oh my gosh, what a brilliant term. You just said a comment there. You said a word about implicit. Can you share more? What do you mean
Absolutely.
by that? What do leaders need to make explicit?
Well, I mean, almost everything.
Yeah.
I would say, I think intentionality, this leads back to elite sport. If you want to be an Olympian, you're really intentional. You're like, what am I doing today? What am I doing next? What am I doing this? Like you're being very intentional about what you're doing because you're like, I want to make the Olympic team and I want to win a gold, and I'm really intentional.
And you're intentional about what you eat, what you think,
what you think,
all of that.
How you recover, all of it. It's the system the high performance system that you live in. And most of us in business aren't intentional. Most of us are reactionary, and most of us are not explicit. And so I would argue that you have to be explicit about your thoughts, right? You have to be aware of your inner monologue, why you're thinking, and not just what you're thinking, but why you think. So in the book, we talk a lot about metacognition. And so metacognition is not just reflection, but it's why you think that is.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like, oh, I think we get this a lot. I get this a lot. I want to be a servant leader. I think servant leadership is good. I'm like, okay, why?
Yeah.
Like you have to get to that point. Or I worked with a leader recently who says fun's important to me. I'm like, okay, let's talk about why that is. Fun's an outcome. Right. So you've really got it. So you got to be really intentional about your thoughts. And again, this is what elite athletes do. Like when someone's about to kick a penalty, they are managing what's going on in their head. Right. They're being mindful. I struggle with the term mindfulness because people think mindfulness is meditation. When meditation is a way of, it's present. Right. Meditation is a way to be mindful. It's not the only way.
Right.
But being really mindful and being really present so you can be intentional is an absolutely critical skill. And when I introduce that to leaders in business, it blows their mind. They're like, what have I been doing for the last 20 years? Like, how have I been successful? Not being intentional about what I do. So I think being explicit about the starting point is being explicit about what you think and why you think it. And then through the authentic leadership model that's in the book, you come out with being explicit about where do I want to focus and what kind of leader do I want to be.
And that links back to the calendar.